It gives me great pleasure. I can't believe that she's actually got time to be here today. She's probably one of the busiest women I know. She is known as the Chief Stemette at Stemettes. She's the former most, little cheer there, love that, former most influential woman in tech by Computer Weekly, multi-awards winner, author of a new book called She's in Control, and most recently she is on our TV screens as Rachel Riley's maternity cover on Countdown. Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise as we welcome to the stage Anne-Marie Imafidon MBE!
A little boogie, as is customary. I absolutely love that. Thank you very much, folks, for having me here today. Can we give another round of applause to Vanessa and the team? Because it is not easy putting on events that look this good, that are this impactful in places like this as well. So big, well done, and congratulations to the team. My name is Anne-Marie Imafidon, and I am a role model. Get me out of here. This is what I've called my talk today, because it can be tough. I'm not being paid, was it 400 grand to go to the jungle anytime soon? So nobody, please, infer anything more than that from the title. I'm really excited to kick off this session and talk a little bit about role modeling, what that's meant, but also this is a safe space, I know as well. So I want to be a bit vulnerable with you all today, because you hear the accolades, you hear the highlights, but it's highlights, it's lowlights, it's a couple of things in between. And so being a role model is not always easy. And so, yeah, I'm a role model, get me out of here. Now, for those of you who have never heard of me before, and you're like, role model for who, for what, why, where, a little bit of a catch-up. I love technology. I love maths and I love helping people. It's always been my tagline and my strapline. My story is a unique one. It starts off in East London, one of the best places on earth, not too far away from here, with this photo top left. And that is me aged about 4 years old outside my parents' house in Stratford, and that they were renting at that point in a terrible dress that ages me a little bit, but you can just about make out a bit of a cheeky face on me. And from that age, I've been very curious. I've been fascinated with just knowing how things work, which arguably is what we do as technologists. We try and understand things and try and pick them apart. Some of you here will remember VCR players. Some of you don't look like you remember VCR players. We had them before DVD, that we had before Netflix, but I was fascinated with these black cassettes, cartridges, big cassette tapes that you'd put inside this big VCR player, and Timon and Pumbaa would show up in a big box, right, in the room. And so one of my earliest memories is taking apart our VCR player just so I could understand where Timon and Pumbaa came from. And I always kick off with that because I'm still apologizing to my parents decades on. But that was the beginning of my curiosity journey. Now, of course, for me, it wasn't just about taking things apart and being mischievous, but it was about knowing how I then apply the knowledge that I'd then gained. And so I took this to the extreme. Many of you will know 4-year-olds that are curious. Not many of you will have seen them then go on to pass GCSEs in primary school, get A-levels by the time that they're 11, or graduate from Oxford age 20 with their masters in maths and computer science. So for me, that's the big journey, right? That's the story. It's the core of the story. Or that's the beginning of the story, at least. And then there are many different things that have happened since that have meant that I've ended up earning, one way or another, this role model, and maybe elevated, some could say, role model status. I have a podcast with Evening Standard and a new one out with the Stemettes. I've got a book that some of you have bought really kindly, thank you. There's a couple of copies still available upstairs. I've been on Countdown, I'm across magazines, I'm guest editing Radio 4's Today programme on New Year's Eve this year, 7 o'clock, if any of you have got nothing else to be doing at 7 a.m. on the 31st of December. But it's an interesting thing for me that I've ended up through exploring, through my curiosity, through my wanting to solve problems and help other people, I've ended up in a lot of these spaces. If I was going to say I wanted to meet Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, I think there are many other things that you could imagine someone should start off with doing. that aren't maybe taking apart their VCR player at home. And so I think it's an interesting one for all of us to reflect on, that often we end up in these scenarios, we end up being designated as a role model, we end up in these spaces, not necessarily because there was the intention to be the role model, and some people do have that, and that is fantastic and that is noble, but a lot of us, especially those of us that Vanessa has told me are in the room today, have ended up being role models by proxy of where you are, the positions that you're in, the problems that you've tried to solve, and the things that you've taken apart. So to kick off this session where we're considering and looking at this idea of role modelling, I wanted to get vulnerable. I wanted to kind of maybe share, folks, 5 things that I'm still figuring out, because it can look like I've got it all figured out. I've got a book out, for goodness sake. There's got to be something I've figured out, right, across that entire book that has been published. But wanted to talk through 5 things that I'm still grappling with. And this isn't about humility, it's about being honest and talking about maybe the other side of this role modelling status. So all these wild things have happened, and the first thing that I'm still grappling with and still trying to understand, still working my way through, is the idea of influence and the spheres of influence that I have as a role model, but even more so reflecting onto you as an audience, the spheres of influence that you have as role models. It's something that, until I was given Most Influential Woman 2020 in IT, I wouldn't have imagined that, again, someone else would have counted me as influential. And I had to kind of think about, what does that mean to be influential? What does it mean when you have influence? And what are the spheres of influence that you have? Now, many of you here are quite fortunate enough to have the title of vice president or the title of director, that you might have been given a team that you lead. You might have even gone out and set up a company on your own. And so sometimes there are very formal spheres of influence that we're all able to access and work within. But it's worth actually reflecting, what are the other spheres of influence? Who are the other people that you're not necessarily talking to or engaging with, that do listen to you, that do appreciate what you say, that do follow along with what you're up to. And I think it's important to recognise the spheres of influence, but also get to practice and experiment with wielding that influence, right? Influencing across those spheres. Is it networks that you're part of? Is it the young people in your life that you know that you never really get to talk to about work? Is it others that get to see your behaviours and the way that you do things, and that's what they're listening to, in addition to the language that you use and the words and the things that you say in the meetings that you're a part of? Is it in the norms and the assumptions that you have as you speak to folks? And what are you doing with those spheres of influence? And this is something I say to folks the whole way across their career. I run social enterprise nonprofit Stemettes. We work with the girls from 5 up to 25, and we're working with them as well on, what's your influence? And they have influence. When one 5-year-old does something, and if any of you have ever been in a room with 5-year-olds, you can kind of see that influence happen, right? One 5-year-old has unicorns, and all of a sudden, all of the 5-year-olds have unicorns on their apps across the room. And so it's an interesting one to understand how that works in the small, to practice and experiment with that in the small, so that then when you do get to the big, you're able to use those spheres of influence and wield them for the kind of change that we all know we're supposed to see. So that's the first of 5. The second of 5 is delving into this experimenting with influence. And I think it's one particularly to keep in mind. There's a couple of you that have come up and spoken to me today. I'm in an EDI network, I'm running our women's network, I'm running our neurodiversity network at work. And I think it's an interesting one to allow yourselves and allow yourself to be able to be iterative and to be able to experiment with this sphere of influence and experiment in this status as a role model. I like technology, as you all know. Many of you will have heard the word agile in this room before. I think there's a lot of life lessons that we can learn from agile, and some maybe that we shouldn't take elsewhere. But I think there's definitely an opportunity to think about how we can be iterative as we experiment with our influence, how we can be iterative in what we're like as a role model and what we do as a role model, and allow ourselves to build, measure, and iterate, see ourselves as a lean startup, and get to be able to kind of have experiments as we go. Doing Countdown was an experiment. I don't know about you, but I didn't know really what I was signing up for, what I was stepping into. I've seen the show before, but it's not the same thing, being on the show versus seeing the show. The response that we got, or I got, because for many people it was the first time they'd ever seen a black woman do maths before, was really, really intriguing, really, really interesting. But it was something to build. You iterate, you learn, you measure, see how that goes, and then you come back again. And so I think it's something to reflect on as a role model, and as someone that's got this status. It's not about being perfect, and getting it all right the first time. But actually, it is about allowing yourself to experiment. It's about allowing yourself to listen, to learn, to measure what has worked, what hasn't worked, and to go back and to iterate again. I know this is being streamed, so it is being recorded. I've actually gone back again and filmed more episodes, so you'll see me on 8 out of 10. Cats does count down in 2023. A whole load of new learning from that episode. And we're yet to see as well what happens when people see a black woman trying to be funny doing maths. So watch this space. Third is to collaborate with care. And this is one that Vanessa and I get to talk about every now and then, but actually working with others and having a brain trust. And folks will have had a brain trust already, I'm sure, across your careers. Mentors, sponsors, coaches, people that you turn to for advice. But I think it's also important as a role model, as someone with that sphere of influence that you now recognize, you know, you're experimenting with, to make sure that you collaborate with care in your status as role model. And what this means is, and I say this for the allies as well as the women in the room, is to think about who it is that you're role modeling for and who you role model with. Because spheres of influence are fantastic on your own, but when you work with others, when you collaborate with others, then you're able to multiply up, right? This is the whole idea of having allyship. You have a sphere of influence, your ally has a sphere of influence, and so there are things that you're able to do and make happen as a result of teaming up and collaborating and working together. But I think it's important to think about values aligning as you collaborate, but also who are you collaborating with? And to be super vigilant about that, to be really, really clear on it. We talk about inclusivity a lot. I know Tech Talent Charter, Debbie's in the room as well. We talk about being intentionally inclusive, not unintentionally exclusive. But I think it's important on our journeys as role models as well to think of who are we collaborating with? How are we finding different types of people with different types of spheres of influence, different types of perspectives to come and help us, not just people who are like us, or people who think the same as us, or people that are pulling in the same direction. And having that diversity does allow you to be stronger. But when we talk about diversity, which I'm sure has been mentioned already, I just want to repeat it again, because repetition is good for learning, it's not just about the protected characteristics. So it's not only about gender, it's not only about ethnicity, it's not only about whether someone has a disability or not, we can think beyond that. The example I always love to give, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, it came out in 2001, is Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. Some of you have seen this film before, I can see you nodding, others of you are missing out. She's the lady in pink in the middle of the slide. She is a law student, a Harvard law student, right? And sometimes people are like, what is she talking about? She's wearing pink, holding a chihuahua. Gotcha, that's the whole point of the movie. She ends up winning, spoiler alert, winning a legal case at the end of the film because of her in-depth knowledge of perms, right? And I know many of you here have lawyers, work with lawyers. Hopefully, I mean, touch wood, you won't need to get one anytime soon. But, you know, looking for lawyers, I don't know how many of you would say you're looking for someone who's got an in-depth knowledge of perms as you evaluate your lawyers and who you're working with. But actually, there's something in diversity of experience, in diversity of thought, that you want to be able to reflect and think about as a role model, but you also want to be able to magnify. If there is a platform that you do happen to have as a role model, how are you bringing others? How are you bringing difference along with that? And how are you consciously doing that as a role model, not just in your DE&I efforts, or not just in your work as someone that's a network, or not just in who you're listening to as an ally, but who are you sharing space, sharing platforms with, and who are you bringing into wield that sphere of influence? 2 more to go. Legacy and paying it forward. And I have been grappling with this, actually. It's an interesting one to try and consider, especially at my very young age. You know, what is the legacy? What happens next? What happens as a result of the change that you're doing today? And I think it's important to think beyond 5 years, beyond 10 years. Keep going with me, beyond 10 years to 20 years, maybe even 30 years. So much of what we do as technologists today, especially if you are in technology, wherever you are across technology, is going to have real and very material impact further down the line. So when you're role modeling now, don't role model for the next promotion or for the next meeting or for the next big thing that's happening for your company or your organization. Role model and think about the future and be future-proofing in what you're doing. I'm not giving you all the answers. I don't know what's happening in 30 years' time. If I knew, I probably wouldn't be here as busy as I am. I'd be doing whatever I need to do for 30 years' time. But actually, there's markers, right? There's little things that we have. Some of you will remember a show called Knight Rider from the 1980s. There's a guy called Michael with a car called Kit. I know some of you don't remember the 1980s. I also don't remember it, but it's a great show. And this guy, Michael, would talk to his car called Kit. He'd talk to the car, which in the 1980s, you didn't talk to inanimate objects. I know we do it all the time now, but then you didn't do it. He would talk to the car would hear him, the car would understand what he said, and they would successfully fight crime together. Right? Apologies for anyone that's listening on the live stream, but if I wanted Alexa to order some toilet roll, I've also been able to successfully work and collaborate with an inanimate object. And it's so funny and so interesting how that thing that was so science fiction has become so science reality without us even noticing, right? Or remembering that, oh my goodness, I saw that. That was a thing that was kind of cool, and they kind of made it look like it was happening, whereas now that's a part of our reality. And I think it's something to remember and to bear as a role model. You're not role modeling for the people that are here now. You're not role modeling for the people that will even take over from them and be in their seats next. But the bigger your spheres of influence become, the broader and the wider that sense of legacy needs to be in the way that you act and the way that you do things now. I said I don't have all the answers. The final one that I really don't have the answer on, and someone asked me earlier, someone was like, are you sleeping? It's like, great question. Who knows? Is self-care. Self-care is a role model. There's so much that we can give of ourselves to others. We've all heard that notion that you can't fill from an empty cup. At my organisation, Stemettes, we've just successfully completed a 4-day work week trial and pilot. So from January, full-time staff will be able to opt in to work 80% of the time for 100% of the pay, assuming that we have 100% of the outcomes, not 100% of the output. And there is a difference in that. Go read it up, go have a look. But I think it's also the final thing that I'm still trying to grapple with is, what does self-care look like? Is it just sleeping? Sometimes that's a low bar. Any of you who already know me know that food and eating is definitely a big part of that. We're still trying to figure out how to squeeze food and eating into the Today programme on Radio 4 for New Year's Eve. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know. But actually having the right systems, the right routines, the right team, we were just talking about backstage, to ensure that you can stay sane as you go ahead and you do all of these things for others is of paramount importance. And so the sooner that you get to iterate on that, collaborate with others to make it happen, think about the legacy you'll be able to have as a result of putting your own mask on before you put it on others, the easier it will be for you as a role model. And once you've figured it out, please do let me know. So that was me. I'm Anne-Marie. I'm selling my copies of my book upstairs while stocks last. I'm a role model. Goodness, it's been a long day, guys. I haven't slept. I'm a role model. Get me out of here.